Hey everybody, welcome back. It's another episode of Jake Talks Star Wars, and today I want to go over some recommendations for me in honor of Star Wars Reads. Star Wars Reads was launched in 2011 by Lucasfilm Publishing, by Disney Publishing and Lucasfilm, Lucasfilm Publishing, and it honored, according to the website, I'm going to read this to you. According to the website, it honors the magic of reading through a commitment to inspiring the next generation of storytellers and innovators. In the past, Star Wars Reads activities have included book giveaways, demonstrations by illustrators, and more. What I want to do, is encourage everybody here, everybody who's watching this, to read a book, read a Star Wars book. I've been doing more of that lately. I don't know about you guys, but the world is pretty stressful right now. Scrolling on your phone can get pretty stressful sometimes. But I tell you what's not nearly as stressful is picking a good book and reading that for about an hour before you go to bed, rather than scrolling on your phone for about an hour before you go to bed. So it's been helping me a lot. I've been doing that for about a month now. And I've went through quite a few books already, of books I'm revisiting, right? Not new ones to me, but books I'm kind of revisiting. But I definitely recommend it. So in honor of Star Wars Reads this month, I want to go over some of my reading recommendations for you, depending on what it is you're interested in. Excuse me. Yeah, it's allergies. I don't know. So first book I'll go over is one I did a video on a few days ago. Depending on when this gets released, it might be over a week ago that I talked about it. But I did a video on this a while back. Star Wars The Living Force. I finished reading this a few weeks ago, and it's great. It's a lot of fun. It's about the Jedi, as you can see, about the Jedi Council that we all know and love from the prequel era, from the era of the Phantom Menace. Happens about a month before, or about a year before the Phantom Menace. So it's a great read. It's a lot of fun. I did a video talking about this book specifically, but definitely worth checking out. Especially if you like the prequels, especially if you like the Jedi Masters, the Jedi Council in the prequels, if you like Qui-Gon Jinn, definitely worth checking out this book. And again, lots of fun and just a great read overall. So, first recommendation for Star Wars Reads Month. So what's my next recommendation? This is a threefer because I'm on the third book right now. I started rereading the Aftermath trilogy after I finished the The Living Force. After I finished The Living Force, I started rereading the Aftermath trilogy. Right now, I'm on Aftermath Empire's End. These are really cool books. Once I finish Empire's End, I'm going to do a video kind of talking about all three. But to give you a quick rundown, these will tell you what happened between the Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku, and kind of how things changed between the Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku, and how quickly things fell apart for the Empire, and what the Empire is trying to do in that time period. So, pretty cool. It does not cover the main people, right? You get Leia in here, you get Han in here, but the book is not centric on Leia and Han, or even Luke. Luke's not even really in the books. He's kind of mentioned, but he's not really in the books. Leia's mentioned, Han is mentioned. They're in the books sometimes, but definitely worth checking out because it's a really neat story. You get Wedge, you get a few new people, Nora and Temmin Wexley, and several others. So you get some new people, you get Wedge, and you get to see what happens between Return of the Jedi and between the Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku. So definitely worth checking out. Another great one. I've been blowing through these in the last 2 weeks or so. I'm about halfway through this one. You see my bookmark is just a napkin from the bagel place, but it works. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'll probably finish this in a couple of days and then do a review / discussion of these three books. It's definitely worth talking about. Now, the other day on Threads, I got onto Threads and I talked to people about what their favorite Star Wars books were, whether it was from the expanded universe or from the expanded universe or from the new canon. And one gentleman gets on there and says, I haven't read any of them. I said, oh, okay, cool. And he says, I haven't read any of them, but I've watched all the movies, I've watched all the shows, all the cartoons, all the shorts, everything. I said, cool, that's fine, right? You're allowed to do that. And I told him, I said, the cool thing about Star Wars reading, Star Wars publishing, books, novels, comics, whatever, if you like something, there's probably a novel or a book or something about it already. And the guy responds, he goes, well, I like Ahsoka. I want more Ahsoka. And I said, well, have I got good news for you? Because E.K. Johnston wrote this just a couple years ago. Or everything's a couple years ago now, right? This is a secret. The older you get, and those of you who are older will know this, the older you get, everything is just a couple years ago, a few weeks ago, a couple years ago. This book was published in, let's see. It was more than a couple years ago. I hate to say, 2016. So this book was published 8 years ago. 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. 9. This book was published 9 years ago. So yeah, a couple years, just a couple years ago. But Star Wars Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. It's a great book. It's a lot of fun. I think it was actually a young adult novel. But I bought it and read it anyway, and I still really enjoyed it because it kind of bridges the gap between what Ahsoka is doing in after Revenge of the Sith, because it doesn't touch on any of those events, at least not. No, it does. It does touch a little bit on those events about the battle at Mandalore and what's going on with that. So it kind of it bridges the gap between what's happening with Revenge of the Sith, what Ahsoka does after that, and in between that and when she gets involved with Bail Organa as a Rebel Alliance like fulcrum agent, right? So it's kind of covering her time in the wilderness, so to speak. If you watched the if you watched the Jedi shorts, if you watch those Jedi shorts that they released a while ago, this book loosely adapts, or this book is adapted, or one of those stories kind of loosely adapts some of the events in this book. So some of the events in this book are already kind of depicted in that Star Wars Jedi stories, but not exactly. It's not a one-for-one thing. So I still think it's definitely worth checking out. It's worth checking out if you like Ahsoka. It's a lot of fun. It's 300 and some odd pages long, but it's pretty big print. So it's pretty big print. So it moves along at a pretty good click. So this is a great book to read if you like Ahsoka. And if learning more about what Ahsoka was doing prior to her time as a fulcrum agent for Bail Organa, if you want to learn more about that, that's pretty interesting. So I definitely recommend Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston if that's what you're into. Now, if you're like me, you're old enough to remember the before times, before Disney, and you're old enough to remember back when there was so much EU content, expanded universe content, you could throw a rock and hit some kind of story about something. I mean, they were writing stories about droids. They were writing stories about bounty hunters that had 10 seconds of screen time, right? And we're starting to do some of that kind of stuff again. But it got cumbersome towards the end, and this is something I think a lot of fans don't like to admit. Oh, excuse me. This is something a lot of fans don't like to admit. It got a little cumbersome towards the end. And when Disney purchased Lucasfilm and purchased Star Wars and the IP and everything else, one of the first things they did, one of the first things I remember them doing, is basically saying, all right, all that stuff, all those stories, those comics, those books, those young adult novels, those children's stories, everything, all that stuff is no longer canon. The only stuff that's canon is the movies and the Clone Wars cartoon, and that's it. And a lot of people were upset. A lot of people are still upset, right? To be honest, a lot of people are still upset. But what are you going to do? So one of the first canon novels released. Now, if you're like me and you kind of want to start from scratch, if you want to start this new canon from scratch, you know the movies backwards and forwards, you want to start the new canon, see where these books are going, see what these books are doing, check this out. This is A New Dawn by John Jackson Miller. Same guy who wrote the Jedi book I was showing you earlier. But New Dawn by John Jackson Miller is all about the Hera and Kanan story of how they met. How Hera and Kanan met, how they came together and started working together to kind of begin to form their cell, the Phoenix cell, right? So I think it's interesting, and it kind of gets into the trend of what Star Wars publishing has been doing for the most part, right? For the last, over a decade now, what they've been doing. And it's been one of two things. They've either been telling stories that are completely independent, that are so far removed from the galaxy at large, they don't really relate to much, or they've been telling stories that are complementing the movies, or complementing the movies, or complementing the shows, or complementing whatever project it is they're working on right now. This is one of those. This came out, if I remember right, about the same time as Rebels was starting to hit. So this was a story they knew they weren't going to tell on screen. So they said, we're not going to tell this story on screen. We're going to give you this story as a novel instead. It's a great story. It's been a long time since I read it. I'm probably going to put this on my to reread list as well here in the next couple of months. But it's definitely worth checking out. Especially if you want to start that new canon fresh. If you haven't been reading the new canon, if you haven't been checking it out, definitely this is a good way to start, because it's fresh in, it's just a whole new start. I mean, they say it's right there in the name. It's kind of a meta name, A New Dawn, right? I remember thinking that at the time. I was like, oh, that's cute. New Dawn. We're starting our new age of canon books. So definitely worth checking out if that's something you want to explore. If you like Rebels, if you like Kanan, if you like Hera, if you like Rebels, this is also worth checking out. And I believe there's a character in here that is involved in Aftermath as well. Don't quote me on that, but I have memories of Sloane being in this as a younger officer. So definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. And all of these books, right? I would classify all of these books that I'm talking about right now as something to read to take your mind off things, something to read to escape, something to read to, just kind of relax. That's how I would classify all of these so far. The next one I'm going to talk about is Star Wars, The High Republic. The neat thing about the High Republic series, and other channels have covered this way better than I'm going to. So if you want to know more about the High Republic, look up one of those other channels like Star Wars Explained or somebody like that. They've done a great job kind of unpacking this. This is like a multimedia push. They said we're basically doing, kind of like Shadows of the Empire back in the day, of everything but a movie. Right? So this has been like everything but a movie and a soundtrack. I don't think they made a soundtrack for this, but it's been almost everything else. So you got movies, you got books, you got comics, you've got audio stories, all sorts of stuff has rolled into this New Republic or High Republic initiative. This happens hundreds of years prior to the events of the Phantom Menace. So the Republic is in a much different situation. It is the High Republic. Things are still going very well for the Republic. They are kind of at their high point of power and prestige and goodness and all these things. The Jedi, again, kind of at the height of their power and their prestige and their goodness and achieving their goals and achieving their purpose. So the Jedi we see in the High Republic are much different than the Jedi we encounter in the prequel era. or during the Clone Wars, and of course, after. So very, very interesting from that perspective. And we don't really have any characters, the exception of maybe one or two, that are crossing over to what we're familiar with. Like Yoda is mentioned in these books. Yoda is in the High Republic in several different projects. He's mentioned in these books, but he doesn't play the same kind of role in this era that he does in the prequel era, right? He still has a few hundred years to go until he reaches, that level. So again, something worth checking out. I like these books a lot. I'm going to reread them again soon. The cool thing about the High Republic is now there is so much, and it's all so interconnected that you could probably spend, if you read at a leisurely pace, you could probably spend a whole year reading nothing but High Republic novels, young adult novels, and comics, and kind of mesh it all together. You could probably spend a whole year doing that, kind of steeped in this world. And again, I would also classify these books as something you can read to just kind of chill and relax and take your mind off things. So definitely recommend that. Next book I'm going to recommend is a little bit different. Might stress some people out, but I think it's really, really well. And I think it's done really, really well. And remember earlier I was talking about how the Star Wars novels nowadays, with the exception of stuff like the High Republic, which is its own thing that kind of stands on its own, right? So High Republic are their own thing that kind of stand on their own. They do their own thing. They're not really in support of any other media. You've got those kind of books. And then you also have books like this, which are in support of a piece of media, either directly or indirectly. So I would say this book kind of indirectly is in support of media like Andor or Rogue One, right? So this is Reign of the Empire, The Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed. This is a fantastic book. I'm going to reread it again soon. When I reread it, I'll probably do a full post about it as well, a full video about it as well. But suffice it to say, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, Saw Gerrera, three distinct storylines crisscrossing and intersecting with each other, and it takes place kind of right after Order 66, like in the weeks and months after Order 66. So this is early in the Empire's history. Definitely worth checking out if you like that more political end of things, if you like that kind of West Wing style political end of things, if you liked Andor, if you liked the talking episodes of Andor where they're kind of going over what's going on and how they're going to do things, how they're going to fix things. This is a great book if you're into that kind of stuff. You may stress some people out because it's kind of topical, right? So just depending, but definitely very interesting. And yeah. So definitely worth checking out. Definitely recommend it. But maybe not this one before bed, right? This is maybe not one I would read to unwind before bed. Different strokes for different folks, though, right? Maybe you could. I don't know if I could. So my last couple of books here are a little bit different. These are books that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for unwinding, but they're still really important books. They're both by the same author. The first one I'll recommend is, I don't think, an official Star Wars book, right? This is not officially a Star Wars book. I don't think this was, blessed by Lucasfilm. But it was written by a historian, Dr. Chris Kempshall. And I think, if I remember right, he might have wrote this while he was still pursuing his doctorate, but he is now Dr. Chris Kempshall. And the book is called The History and Politics of Star Wars, History and Politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy. So, a very interesting book because Dr. Kempshall is a true historian. He is an honest-to-God historian, trained as a historian with his PhD and the whole bit. And he is writing this book kind of going over the history of Star Wars and talking about how all the things in Star Wars that we love are influenced by the real world. And his citations are extensive. Just for one chapter, I'm looking at the last chapter here, he uses notes, like footnotes. So just for the last chapter here, he has for the last chapter, he has 191 footnotes. He lists primary sources, comics, graphic novels, computer games, films, television shows, books, online sources. And the list goes secondary sources. And he does that for every chapter. So every chapter has pages on pages on pages of footnotes and sources that he used and were checked on. So everything he's saying with purpose. Everything he's saying with purpose and with something to back it up. And what he does is he examines what Star Wars is kind of based on historically, but also he looks at when each project or when specific projects were published or released and what was influencing them historically at that point. What was going on in the country, what was going on in the world that influenced those stories. So, for instance, what's going on in the 90s that's influencing the expanded universe, right? How are people feeling in the 90s that's influencing the expanded universe? What's going on in the early 2000s between 9/11 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that are influencing the prequel trilogy, right? So he examines all those kind of things, and it's a great read. If you are a history-minded person, if you're like me, if you're a history-minded person, you guys, if you're watching this, you probably don't know this. I'm a historian by trade. I got a master's degree in history. So this is very, very interesting for me. I will say it is not written I don't think it's written for the public. I don't think it's fair to say that it's written for the general public. It is a much more academic style of book. But if you want to put the time in, if you want to spend the time, it's definitely worth checking out. Again, this one especially is not something I would recommend for reading at night to kind of unwind. This is something that requires a lot more of what I would call like an active reading. Maybe even taking your own notes. When I was in college, I used to read books like this and actually highlight and write my own notes in the margins as I move away from that as I got older. But definitely something that requires a lot more active reading. But still worth it, nonetheless. History and Politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy, Chris Kempshall. Not sure if it's even still in print. But if you can find it at the library, if you can find it secondhand, anything like that, definitely worth a read. So check it out. And my last recommendation is also by Dr. Chris Kempshall. Now, this book is hands down, I think, probably the most unique Star Wars book to come out in many years. This was released in 2024 as well, so just last year. And this is The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire by Dr. Chris Kempshall. But this is not an academic book like the other one is. This book is written as an in-universe history book. So Dr. Kempshall is actually writing this book from the perspective of a character we see in the sequel trilogy named Beaumont Kin. Beaumont Kin was played by Dominic Monaghan. The guy from The Hobbit, or the guy from Lord of the Rings. He was one of the hobbits. Dominic Monaghan played this character, Beaumont Kin. Beaumont Kin's backstory is that he was a historian or an archaeologist that met Luke Skywalker and Lor San Tekka, and through their influence got roped into being involved in the Resistance. And he was an author and a historian who was researching the Sith and researching the Jedi and the history of the Force. And the perspective of the book is that he's writing this after the rise of Skywalker, after the rise of Skywalker, after the events of the Battle of Exegol. So he is kind of sitting down as a historian, having participated in these events himself, sitting down as a historian and tracking, how did we get here, right? How did the empire rise? How did it maintain control? And how did it fall? Very, very interesting stuff. And he does a great job of kind of writing it from the perspective of a person in that galaxy and in that universe. And I can't recommend it enough. I will say, this may not be something you want to read at night to unwind. This may be something you read at other times. It's not necessarily a relaxing read, because Kempshall is a historian, and he is telling these stories as if he is a historian telling you what happened, the reality of what happened. And a lot of it, to a lot of people around the world, depending on where you're from, depending on what your own history is, a lot of it sounds familiar, because we know George Lucas didn't just make this stuff up out of his head. When he wrote these stories, he was looking at things that happened in the past and basing these stories on things that happened in the past, and basing these stories on real people and real events and real, how people work. So there's a lot in here that may remind you of things that are going on, or things that have been going on, or things that have happened in the past. So just keep that in mind. But it's a powerful, powerful book, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you want to, if you have those sorts of interests. So those are my reading recommendations. I tried to give you, I've got my stack of books over here. They just fell down. Those are my reading recommendations. I try to give you several. Tried to give you some that are going to make you feel good, that are going to kind of help you relax, and some that are going to make you think and stretch those brain muscles, because that's really important for all of us. And sometimes it's fun to examine these things that we find so interesting from different perspectives. So definitely check those out. If you have any questions about any books that I talked about, let me know. You can let me know in the comments below. You can also hit me up on Threads or Instagram. If there's a book you want me to talk about, if there's a book you want me to read and talk about in a future video, you can let me know about that too. You can put that down in the comments. Hit me up at Threads or Instagram as well. Remember, if you made it this far, first of all, if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. That is awesome. But if you made it this far, remember, like, share, subscribe if you haven't already. And take care of each other out there. And as always, may the force be with you guys. I'll catch you next time.